Okay, so this is a video that I've wanted to make for a while now, and that is the Nanotyrannus versus Tyrannosaurus Rex debate. Now, these two are from Beasts of the Mesozoic, by the way, if you want to buy them. The link is in the description. Now, I've wanted to cover this for a while because it's something that I'm incredibly fascinated in. The ontogeny of dinosaurs is just really fascinating, like especially when we have any examples of growth stages through dinosaurs' lives. And of Tyrannosaurus Rex in particular, it's always fascinated me. A little bit of backstory for me, I'm always someone who's been in favor for Nanotyrannus representing a juvenile T-Rex. But now that I said that, I feel like I should probably fill in anybody who's not in the know. So for the longest time, there's been a debate on whether or not this guy right here is a juvenile T-Rex or if it represents a completely different genus known as Nanotyrannus. This debate has been ongoing for the longest time. In 2020, there was a paper published that was basically in favor for this guy being a juvenile T-Rex, and that's how we stood for 4 years until the beginning of this year with a paper that argued that this guy was actually Nanotyrannus, completely separate from T-Rex. It's basically like the Olympics. Every 4 years, new Nanotyrannus debate. But I mainly want to focus on this brand new paper, and I know that everybody has already talked about it to death, but it's just something I've wanted to bring up on the page because, once again, growth of dinosaurs is something that just fascinates me. So what does the paper argue? Well, one of the biggest things that it argues, that many have argued in the past, is that Nanotyrannus is very different to Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, of course, that sounds like a no-brainer. In nature today, there's a lot of animals that when they're younger, they look very different to how their adult counterparts look. So to assume that this guy is going to look different when it's young compared to this guy, that simply makes sense. But what the paper argues is that a lot of the skeletal differences between this guy and that big guy that I already set down are so different that this guy would have to go through so many physical changes in a short amount of time to eventually get to this point that it simply just wouldn't make sense for the animal. And that kind of leads into the next thing, that's growth rate of Nanotyrannus right here. By the way, I'll just be referring to it as Nanotyrannus from here on out just to keep the distinction between the two of them. But the growth rate of Nanotyrannus, they noted that a specific specimen of Nanotyrannus appeared to have a growth that was slowing right before the animal's death. This seems to imply that the animal was reaching its full-grown size before it unfortunately perished. And if it was reaching its full-grown size and it looked this different compared to Tyrannosaurus Rex, well, that seems to indicate that, no, it is not a juvenile T-Rex. And a lot of the use to back this up is just how different this specimen is compared to T-Rex. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of skeletal differences. That includes things like a more slender build, I think a different number of teeth, longer arms, like decently longer arms, longer claws, these long skinny legs, and yeah, just a lot of things that are quite a bit different to what you would see in Tyrannosaurus Rex. And using that logic, considering the fact that it was near the end of its growth, it seems unlikely that it would grow this much in that short amount of time. And that's all well and good. But here's one of the biggest problems, I think, with the paper, is that when it was kind of released, and this is in terms of a lot of the other scientific, like the public articles, kind of pushed out all of that information again, is that they kind of push this as the end-all, be-all of the debate, when in actuality, I feel like all it did was add some fuel to that fire, because the debate is very much still going on. Let's look at all of those things that they brought up. Firstly, we'll talk about the growth. So they noted that the animal appeared to be slowing in growth towards its death. That is the significant part right there. It was slowing before its death. There could be other explanations for that. One of the most popular explanations that many have brought up right now is that it's possible that the animal injured itself and then was unable to hunt and then therefore was unable to eat, which would then cause its growth to slow a little bit. And that injury and the lack of food could be the reason why it perished. So looking at that growth rate really isn't that much of a slam dunk. And then as far as the proportions go, the fact that it has longer arms and longer claws and a more slender build, the slender build is notable because we've noted in tyrannosaurs before that they typically do have a more slender build when they're younger. I mean, that just seems likely anyway because, as I mentioned before, animals go through significant changes as they grow. To be fair, though, they do bring up the fact that other tyrannosaurs are noted to be different. They noted that Nanotyrannus is like just its proportions are just way different compared to other juvenile tyrannosaurs. These are other tyrannosaurs in the Tyrannosaurid family, by the way. But it's not like most of these differences can't be explained as well. like the longer arms and the longer claws. Now, I've heard many bring up the fact that if you look at something like Triceratops, where they have these spikes on their frill when they're younger, but as they age, they slowly start to lose those. And then the frill just becomes completely circular. They basically kind of just like reabsorb all of that calcium, I guess. The same could potentially be true for Nanotyrannus here. It could be that it just reabsorbs some of that calcium in its arms to, become like this later in life. And when you think about the ecological niche hypothesis with this animal, that does make sense too. Now, the hypothesis is that when Tyrannosaurus was younger, it would fill a different niche to when it was older. This would allow them to not have to compete. It would go after the smaller, more agile prey items when the larger one would go after the bigger things. So because of that, it might get more use out of having longer arms with longer claws. But then as it aged, it might not have that use anymore, and so they just become shorter in favor for a more powerful bite. That's not confirmed, but it is a possibility. But something else that they brought up is that they looked at the lineage of these two animals, as in what they would be most related to, and they concluded that Nanotyrannus is not really that related to Tyrannosaurus, something that you wouldn't find if it was simply just a juvenile Tyrannosaurus. That was just another piece of added detail that is, of course, important for the overall paper. Like, that is certainly something that should be kept in mind. But what's the overall conclusion here? Well, that it's still very much a debate. This paper, it added some new things that are very insightful, but it definitely didn't conclude anything. And I have to say that I absolutely agree with Dr. Holtz here when he says that the only way we'll actually end this debate is if we discover a full-grown Nanotyrannus that is distinct from Tyrannosaurus, or we find a juvenile Tyrannosaurus that is distinct from Nanotyrannus. And again, I absolutely agree with that. Until then, I think it's still just simply going to be a debate that'll just be ongoing. Now, I do think that if we get more of an opportunity to examine the Jane specimen, or finally examine the dueling dinosaurs specimen, then I think we might get a lot more insight that is a lot more helpful for this ongoing debate. But until that day, we're unfortunately just stuck with the back and forth that we're going to have what seems like every 4 years now. And I'm definitely not someone who can say anything conclusively. But of course, I do have this paper linked in the description if it's something you want to read for yourself and form your own conclusions. However, what I will say is that this is one of the biggest reasons why I love paleontology. Because even though debates like this can often be frustrating, all of that back and forth that we do, oftentimes this is how we learn new things. These type of discussions and like looking at all of the evidence that we have, that is really how we're going to get to places that we couldn't have beforehand. So hopefully, eventually we do get an answer that is a little bit more satisfying. Like, we can definitely say that this is a juvenile T-Rex, or that this is definitely its own genus. But until then, all we can really do is speculate and just continue on debating, as I've said a lot. Yeah, that's where we are with the Nanotyrannus Tyrannosaurus Rex debate. I hope you guys got some enjoyment from this video. It was just something I wanted to just kind of talk about a little bit. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. That sort of thing certainly does help out. But that's pretty much all I have for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have an awesome day.